Before the first sleet reached the ridge, June had already been told to leave. Not later, not after breakfast, now. She took her little brother's hand, stepped off the porch, and walked into the mountain road with one school bag, 2 thin coats, and a jar of peanut butter that had less than an inch left at the bottom. By dusk, Miles could barely lift his feet. That was when June saw the little house. It was not on any road. It had no mailbox. It sat below the hemlocks like the mountain had folded itself over it. The roof leaned low. The chimney was black with age. But beside the house, under dead thistles and frozen grass, the ground was divided into careful square beds. Someone had not just lived there. Someone had prepared. And June understood, before she ever touched the door, that this forgotten place had once been someone's answer to being left alone. The woman who had taken them in did not shout when she sent them away. That almost made it worse. She stood in the narrow doorway of the rented trailer with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and eyes that refused to meet June's. "I cannot feed 3 mouths," she said. Miles was 7. He looked from the woman to June, waiting for someone older to explain that the sentence did not mean what it sounded like. But June was only 15, and she understood too much. She packed what she could without crying. A pair of socks for Miles, a cracked flashlight with weak batteries, a sweatshirt that still smelled like wood smoke, half a sleeve of crackers, the peanut butter. Then they were outside. The valley road was already darkening. Cold mist slid down from the high ridges and tucked itself into the ditches. Cars passed twice in the first hour, headlights moving over them and then away, as if they had been part of the weather. Miles kept his hand in hers until his fingers went numb. "Where are we going?" he asked. June looked toward the black line of the mountains. "Higher," she said. It was not a plan. It was only a direction. The paved road became gravel. The gravel became a logging track. By the time the trees closed behind them, the world had narrowed to wet leaves, breath, and the small sound Miles made every time his shoe slipped in the mud. June carried him for the last stretch. He was too big for it now, all knees and elbows, but when his head dropped against her shoulder, she felt how cold he was. That scared her more than the dark. They could be hungry until morning. They could be tired until morning. But cold could decide things before the sun came back. June left the old track and pushed through hemlock branches, looking for any dip in the ground that might block the wind. Then the trees opened just enough for her to see a slanted roof below the ridge. At first she thought it was a shed. Then she saw the chimney. The house was small enough that one storm could have swallowed it whole. Gray boards, stone steps, a front window clouded by dirt and old rain. The porch rail had collapsed into the weeds. Miles lifted his head. "Is someone there?" June did not answer, because she was looking at the ground beside it. The weeds had grown wild, but they had not erased the pattern underneath. There were square beds edged with flat stones. A row of bent metal hoops where cloth covers had once stretched over winter plants. A rain barrel, cracked down one side, still stood beneath the gutter. June had seen empty houses before. This was different. This looked like a place that had been trying to keep living after the person was gone. The door was stuck. June pressed her shoulder into it once, then again. Wood scraped against dirt packed under the threshold, and the door opened with a long, dry groan. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old ash, and closed-up winters. The house was only one room, a narrow iron bed against one wall, a table with one broken chair, a shelf of jars so dusty they looked gray. In the center sat a cast-iron stove, squat and black, with a pipe running into the chimney. June went to it first. If the stove was cracked, they were finished. She touched the iron with both hands, felt along the seams, checked the little door, the grate, the pipe. It was old, but not broken. That single fact felt larger than luck. Miles stood under the doorway, shivering so hard the flashlight trembled in his hand. June searched the corners. She found a box of matches inside a coffee tin. Most had softened from years of damp, but a few still snapped dry between her fingers. Beneath the bed, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a bundle of split kindling. Not much, enough to try. The first match bent, the second sparked and died. June heard Miles whisper, "Please." On the third match, the flame caught the curled bark and climbed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a thin orange tongue moved through the stove, touched the kindling, and became light. The room changed. The black stove clicked. The walls showed their cracks. Miles's face appeared out of the dark, pale and stunned by warmth. June closed the stove door gently, as if she was afraid the fire might notice how badly they needed it, and leave. They slept on the floor in their coats. June kept waking to feed the stove, one stick at a time. Every time the fire dropped low, she saw the one-room house without it. Cold boards, empty shelves, Miles breathing beside her under a curtain of darkness. By morning, the sleet had turned the porch silver. Miles was still asleep when June stepped outside. The garden beds were easier to see in the pale light. Whoever had made them had carried stones from the creek and set them by hand. The soil inside each square was darker than the ground around it, protected beneath old leaves. Near the back wall, June found a path, not a trail made by animals, leaves. Near the back wall, June found a path, not a trail made by animals, a path made by feet that had once walked it every day. It led behind the house to a leaning springhouse built into the hillside. Its door hung crooked on leather hinges. June pulled it open and smelled wet stone. Inside, cold water poured from an iron pipe into a shallow basin. Clear, moving, alive. June stood there with her mouth open. Water changed everything. She filled a dented kettle she found on the shelf and carried it back like treasure. When Miles woke, she made him drink first. Then she mixed the last crackers into warm water and peanut butter until it became something like soup. He ate slowly, eyes half closed, both hands around the bowl. "Can we stay?" he asked. June looked around the little house. The stove, the spring house, the garden no one had finished forgetting. "For today," she said. But privately, she had already started counting. How much wood? How much food? How much weather before the roof gave way? That day she found an axe with a cracked handle behind the spring house. She found a stack of old burlap sacks in the loft space above the bed. She found mouse-chewed seed packets in a drawer, their faded labels marked beans, turnips, and winter rye. None of it was enough, but it was more than nothing, and nothing was what they had carried up the mountain. The next week did not feel like living. It felt like arguing with the cold. June woke before light and dragged fallen branches from the woods. She learned which wood smoked badly and which burned hot. She patched the biggest wall cracks with moss, clay, and strips of burlap. She cleaned the stovepipe with a wire brush tied to a branch. She scraped ice from the basin inside the spring house. Miles became quieter at first, then useful. He sorted jars by which ones were cracked. He shook seed packets and saved anything that rattled. He stuffed dry leaves into a sack and pressed it against the gap beneath the door. When June's hands were too stiff to untie knots, he used his smaller fingers. One afternoon, while following the spring runoff downhill, June found the creek. It slipped between dark rocks under fern roots, too narrow for much, but alive enough for minnows and small trout. She had no fishing line, so she built a trap from a broken basket and waited with frozen feet until something silver flashed inside. They ate one small fish that night, split carefully down the middle. Miles smiled with grease on his chin. It was the first real smile June had seen since the trailer. After that, the house began to make sounds that belonged to them. The clack of jars being cleaned, the thump of wood dropped by the stove, Miles humming under his breath while he rubbed soot from the kettle. Still, June never let herself feel safe, because smoke rose, and smoke could be seen. On the 9th morning, she found boot prints near the spring house. Not deer, not bear, human. They cut through the frost, stopped at the crooked door, then turned toward the woods. June did not tell Miles. June did not tell Miles. She carried water back with both hands steady and spent the day working as if nothing had changed. But that night, she moved the table in front of the door and slept with the cracked axe beside her. Every sound became a person, a branch tapping the wall, ice dropping from the roof, Miles turning in his sleep. The fear did not make her leave. It made her work faster. She dragged more wood from the deadfall. She pulled the broken rain barrel apart and used the metal strips to patch the roof edge. She dug through the garden beds and found 3 stubborn carrots, thin as fingers, but still orange under the frozen soil. Then, behind the bed, where one floorboard sat higher than the others, Miles discovered the tin box. It was wedged between 2 joists, wrapped in cloth that crumbled when June touched it. Inside were a few buttons, a dull pocket knife, a folded map of the ridge, and a small notebook tied with black string. The first pages were lists: beans planted, rye covered, stovepipe cleaned, spring door fixed. Then the writing changed. My name is Clara Voss. If this house is empty when you find it, it means I did not make it back before the first hard freeze. June read the line twice. Miles sat very still. The notebook belonged to the woman who had built the garden after her husband died in a mine collapse below the ridge. She had lived alone for years, trading herbs and canned beans in town, never asking much from anyone because, as she wrote, asking made people think they owned the answer. Near the back of the notebook, one page had been folded down. June smoothed it open. If the world sends somebody here with nowhere to go, let the house do what it was made to do. Fire first, water second, roof third, food after that. Fear can wait its turn. June sat beside the stove for a long time. The words did not feel comforting exactly. They felt practical, like Clara Voss had reached across all those empty years, not to rescue them, but to hand June the order of things. Fire, water, roof, food. Last. The next morning, June followed Clara's map to a cut in the hillside east of the springhouse. There, under a flat stone marked by 3 scratches, she found a buried wooden box lined with tin. Inside were dry beans, 2 jars of salt, a coil of wire, and 4 squares of waxed cloth. The food was not a miracle. It was preparation. That somehow made it better. It meant a person had once looked at the same ridge, the same weather, the same hard future, and decided survival could be built piece by piece. But the boot prints returned 2 days later. This time, June saw them before noon, pressed into mud near the garden wall. They were larger than hers, fresh. She stood there with the kettle in her hand, looking toward the trees. Then she saw movement. An old man in a brown coat stood beyond the hemlocks, watching the chimney smoke. June's grip tightened. He raised one hand, not in greeting, not in threat, just enough to show he was there. Then he set something on a stump and walked away. June waited until he disappeared before she moved. On the stump lay a sack of potatoes and a note written on the back of an envelope. Clara said the house was for the ones who needed it. Keep the stovepipe clear before snow. There was no name. Miles asked who left it. June looked at the trees, then at the cabin, then at the words Clara had written years before. Someone who knew her, she said. The gift did not make winter easy. It made winter possible. The first real storm came hard from the north. Snow covered the logging track in one afternoon. Wind shoved itself under the door and roared in the chimney until the stove flame bent sideways. That night, the smoke backed into the room. Miles started coughing. June opened the stove door and saw soot falling from the pipe. The chimney was choking. For one moment she froze. Then she remembered the notebook. Keep the stovepipe clear before snow. She wrapped burlap around her hands, Miles's scarf over her mouth, and climbed onto the roof with the wire brush. Ice cut through her pants. Wind shoved at her shoulders. Below, Miles cried her name from inside the house. June drove the brush down the chimney again and again until black soot burst into the storm. By the time she climbed back through the window, her fingers were numb and her lips had gone blue. But the stove drew clean. The fire rose. Miles stopped coughing. June lay on the floor beside him, shaking so hard she could not speak. Miles crawled against her and tucked the blanket over both of them, the way she had done for him every night since they arrived. The storm lasted 3 days. On the second day, part of the porch roof collapsed. On the third, the springhouse door froze shut, and June had to break the ice loose with the axe. The potatoes shrank. The woodpile fell faster than she had planned. But the little house held. The roof did not give in. The stove did not die. The spring kept moving under stone. And when the storm finally passed, the whole ridge went silent under snow. June stepped outside at dawn and saw smoke rising straight from the chimney into clean, blue cold. Miles came out carrying 2 cups of hot water, proud as if he had served a feast. Steam lifted around his face. Beyond the porch, the garden beds were buried. June knew where each square was now. She knew which corner held beans, which wall needed patching, which path led to water, even when snow hid the world. The house was no longer a thing they had found by accident. It had become a set of answers they had learned how to use. Miles sat on the step beside her. "Are we still in trouble?" he asked. June looked down the buried track, toward the valley that had let them walk away. Then she looked back at the chimney, the patched roof, the springhouse door, the garden sleeping under snow. "Yes," she said softly. Then she put her arm around him. "But not like before." When spring came, the first green did not appear in the forest. It appeared in Clara's beds. Tiny rye blades cut through the black soil. Beans swelled in jars near the window. Miles painted new markers on flat stones, one crooked letter at a time. June found herself listening less for footsteps and more for weather. That was how she knew the house had changed her. Or maybe the house had simply reminded her what Clara had already written. Fire first, water second, roof third, food after that. Fear could wait its turn. People in the valley would have called that place abandoned. But abandoned things do not always stop working. Sometimes they wait in the weeds with a stove, a spring, a packet of seeds, left in the walls to teach 2 lost children how to stay. The world had thrown them away at the foot of the mountain. The ridge gave them a door. And behind it, a life began where everyone else had stopped looking.